It's that time of the year again where ghosties and ghoulies and long-legged beasties stalk the earth, so we've decided to celebrate the occasion by having a look at some games that include a wee bit of horror in them. But not just any games, no sir, because we're going to look at games inspired by one certain man. In 1890, the world of horror was changed forever when one pasty, sickly little runt of a man was born in Providence, Rhode Island. The world may not have known it at the time, but it had just witnessed the birth of one of the greatest horror writers in the entirety of history. That man was Howard Phillips Lovecraft, and he would go on to more or less single-handedly create the cosmic horror genre. Anyone who's seen a Hammer horror film will know what came before that. Vampires, werewolves, Dracula, the Mummy, Frankenstein's monster, all the horror staples we know and love that mostly fall under the heading of gothic horror, where blood-sucking beasts lurk in dark corners, doing unspeakable things to virgins. Gothic horror is a world populated by supernatural predators, although the most ruthless of them tend to wear evening dress all the time, and have a crippling speech impediment when it comes to the letter W, and it's anybody's guess whether they want to drain your blood or pump you senseless. And it's light years away from the universe Lovecraft envisioned. The emotions fueling gothic horror are passion and hunger, the thrill of the hunt and the scent of blood. But with cosmic horror, the blood is replaced by slime and unknowable secretions, and the only emotions you'll encounter are despair and madness. Forget about encountering bloodthirsty supernatural predators here. Instead, prepare yourself for a cold, uncurring universe populated by vast, slobbering, shambling abominations that could wipe out humanity in an instant without even noticing we existed at all, and where the merest glimpse of the true, unvarnished reality of the universe is enough to drive you mad from the revelation. So, settle in, grab your copy of the Necronomicon, and let's take a look at the man, the mythos, and his legacy in the world of video games. It's fair to say that H.P. Lovecraft was not exactly what you'd call a happy man. In a professional capacity, he was never able to sustain a living for himself as a writer, partly due to him not really having the confidence or the drive to promote himself. Strained financial circumstances dogged him for his entire life, until he finally died in poverty at the shockingly young age of 46. It's a sad twist of fate that the success he deserved eluded him for his entire life, and his work only became the phenomenon it is after his death. Although, given how deeply nihilistic Lovecraft was, he'd probably find that darkly funny. That nihilism, along with his pathological xenophobia, was a product of Lovecraft's personal life, which can best be described as, well, it's probably easiest to say that his personal life was fucked. Suffering from a chronic illness during childhood and dogged by night terrors, he went on to have a full breakdown in 1908, probably due to what today will be termed atypical depression, and spent the next 6 years never leaving the house. All of that melded together to form a man who was pathologically xenophobic in the actual literal sense of the word. You see, in the modern world, people like to sit there navel-gazing and pontificating at length about how racist Lovecraft was and how his work should be removed from history because of it. But look at the time when he lived. Racism was sort of built into the human condition back then, so it's hardly fair to single out one man for it. And anyway, it wasn't racism that fueled his works, and you have to squint a lot to say that it did. No, what fueled his works was xenophobia in the literal sense of the word, a constant terror of the strange, of the unknown, of anything outside his usual world. There's very little room for race in there when he was basically scared of anyone who wasn't a native New Englander. We'll come back to that whole racism debate later, because there's another key element in cosmic horror, and it's an element that quite possibly came from his depression, or rather, from the interplay between his depression and the general religious nature of the world back in those days. We'll start from this simple phrase: in Lovecraft's universe, there is no God. Supernatural beasts are the stuff of gothic horror, but in cosmic horror, there is no supernatural. Take every single entity in Lovecraft's bestiary. Dead Cthulhu dreaming away in Relia. Azathoth, the blind idiot god that bubbles at the centre of creation. The crawling chaos of his Nyarlathotep. The eldritch alien colour that leeches the very life out of the land around it. Take a look at every one of those and you'll find an entity, a thing, that is hideously horrifyingly real. And if there is no supernatural, there is no higher power. There is simply a cold, implacable universe where nothing we do matters, and our existence is as inconsequential and meaningless as a mote of dust. That is, undoubtedly, a symptom of depression, and here it's writ large across the entire cosmos. Lovecraft's universe is one where humanity would be wiped out in an instant by something so vast and incomprehensible that it would appear to us to be a god, while it wouldn't even notice our passing, or that we'd even existed at all. The only thing that keeps us safe is ignorance. To gaze upon the true face of reality is to go mad from the revelation, and that can be an interesting thing to add to video games. Now, what we're not talking about here is games that stick in Lovecraftian elements of set dressing and flavour, although that can be fun too. Take Fallout 3 for instance. In that game, over in one corner of the map you'll find the Dunwich building, quite blatantly named after Lovecraft's story, the Dunwich Horror, and if you go down into the bowels of the building, then onward into the catacombs beneath, you'll find an altar to some kind of entity by the name of Ugg Qualtoff, who apparently turns people into ghouls, and who gives you lots of disturbing visions on your way through the building. We never see that entity in the flesh, but we know its story is tied with another ancient evil book, called the Kribekna. We know this because if we install the Point and Lookout DLC, we can go find the evil book and then destroy it on the altar underneath the Dunwich building. We may not see Unqualtoff in Fallout 3, but fast forward by 10 in-game years and we certainly see something in Fallout 4. The location in question this time is the Dunwich Borer's Quarry, and yet again, you have visions as you wander through the location. This time, it's of the quarry on what seems to be the day the bombs fell, and as you reach the end of the journey, you have one last vision of the Dunwich management and their families being sacrificed to some dark entity. I say some dark entity since it might not be Unqualtoff this time. It might be Kremver instead, since the sacrificial dagger you find is called Kremver's Tooth, although the giant statue at the bottom of the sinkhole down there seems a bit too human to be some infernal mindfucker made of exotic matter. Either way, it's probably best to avoid asking what Dunwich Borers were up to, you know, lest we go mad from the revelation and all that. Oh, and there's another homage in Fallout 4, this time to the story Pickman's model in the form of the Pickman Gallery. But still, we're not talking about superficial homages like that. The Fallout series may have a couple of Lovecraftian homages, but you can't really say that they're Lovecraftian games. The same is true of Dead Space, although with the way the trilogy ended, with humanity being nothing more than food for moon gods, the story is very, very Lovecraftian. Even then, it's not a Lovecraftian game per se. For that, we need to look elsewhere, and we'll start with the game that everyone was Well, actually, okay, everyone was probably expecting Call of Cthulhu, but since neither of us have even played that one, we can't really talk about it here. So fuck it, Bloodborne instead. You see, Bloodborne is an interesting case, in that it starts out as pure gothic horror, with vampires and werewolves and the curse carried in the blood. And then you go to Bergenworth, and you see this. Followed by this. And then these. And these. And this. So we've gone from werewolves to fighting great ones then. I don't think we're in Kansas anymore. It's all part of the game's insight mechanic, with insight being a stat that goes up the more inhuman knowledge you learn, and the thing is that while you need higher insight to do certain things in the game, increasing that stat lowers your frenzy resistance. Put simply, the more you learn about the real truth of Yarnum, the more you, sing it with me, go mad from the revelation. In essence, you're playing as a Lovecraftian protagonist, albeit one who's figured out that running away screaming is only a temporary solution, so best break out the really fucking big shotgun. Bloodborne provides a decent exploration into the world of cosmic horror, but if you want a game that's basically 100% Lovecraft, while not being an actual Lovecraft adaptation, then you need look no further than the game we've been playing for the vast majority of this video. Yep, it's Darkest Dungeon. Basically, this is as close as you can get to a Lovecraft adaptation without actually being a direct Lovecraft adaptation. And yes, we mean that in terms of both the plot and the mechanics. Plot first, because you inherit an old estate from a relative, and it's an estate that harbours a dark secret, because it turns out that while excavating the underground dungeons and catacombs, your relative accidentally unearthed portals to somewhere hellish, presumably, because it unleashed all sorts of nightmare abominations onto the land. So, it's up to you to gather together a party of allies and sally forth into those vile subterranean recesses to cleanse the land once again through the cunning use of ramming stabby things up monsters' ring pieces. Eventually, you have to fight the ancestor who left you the estate, who's become corrupted and turned into an avatar of the crawling chaos. Finally, you come to the final battle with the Great Evil, the Heart of Darkness, a hideous fleshy abomination that happens to be the progenitor of all life on Earth. And you kill it. Huzzah! Well, except you don't. Because the spirit of your ancestor appears and tells you that all you did was delay its inevitable awakening. It's a part of an endless cycle in your family line, you see, with every descendant meeting the same fate as they constantly hold back Armageddon. And now it's your turn to become the cursed defender of reality. So the plot is out and out Lovecraft, but as it happens, so is one of the key mechanics in the game. We're talking about the affliction system, a mechanic we touched upon when we did a video about morality in games, and it's probably best described as an evolution of the idea that seeing things you were never meant to see will drive you mad. The key difference is that the affliction system doesn't deal with the nebulous idea of insanity, instead using the idea of stress and psychological trauma. By widening it up and not just saying they're insane now, it allows for things like party members having heart attacks as you journey through the catacombs. It's not just negative afflictions though. Some party members might develop positive afflictions in the same way that intense stress can sometimes compress someone in the real world so much that they turn into a creature of pure iron will. So, while it may be ever changing and evolving, we can say with some certainty that the legacy of the greatest horror writer ever is going to continue for fucking ever, which naturally means that some people want to see it banned and removed from history. Yeah, it seems to happen with amusing regularity. Whenever Halloween rolls around, some dickhole somewhere will pen an article about how Lovecraft was a racist monster, and we need to all forget he existed. The word hate is often sprinkled liberally throughout, along with problematic, and they'll usually stick a few extra buzzwords in to really assassinate the man's character. And then, lots of squawking babies will cackle in agreement, and we'll have to go through the same fucking dance year after bastard year. This year, it's the turn of Eurogamer, and an article entitled "Games Really Need to Fall Out of Love with Lovecraft." No, we're going to go into more depth with this, naturally, but I will say right now that my immediate reaction to the headline is, no, bugger off.
Confidence surges as the enemy crumbles.
Yeah, but I'm nicer than you. Oh? Ha! What, because they have no agency or independent thought, and can only repeat what they've been programmed to say by the Tumblr hive mind? NPCs it is then. Karma's a wonderful thing. Anyway, yes, they want to ban Lovecraft, and I feel that there is only one possible response to their argument that Lovecraft was a racist. You see, they want to drag you into a debate about it and make you defend him so that they can virtue signal and prove how amazing they are. So, tell everyone the only appropriate response to their argument, subtitle guy. The thing is that racism was not the thing fueling Lovecraft's writing, it was xenophobia, and since it seems every bugger has forgotten the literal fucking meaning of that, it means fear. Specifically, fear of things that were strange or unfamiliar to him. Sure, that may have included black people, but it also included white people, German people, fish, octopi, dogs, rats, the dark, curtains, wallpaper, and anyone who lived outside of a 30-mile radius from Providence, Rhode Island. The article talks about Lovecraft feeling revulsion towards certain people or certain things, but it's disingenuous in the extreme because it then doesn't say what caused his revulsion. To the article's author, it was that randomised hate that she likes to put everything down to, but it really wasn't. He didn't have time to hate anything. He was too busy being utterly shit scared of it. We can glean something very simple from the article, and it's this. There is a very, very high chance that the author has never read an actual Lovecraft story in her fucking life. She's done the standard NPC thing of looking at the pop culture around it and christening herself an expert on the man. Here's a pro tip. Lovecraftian horror is not about octopuses or squishy monsters with too many teeth and even more eyeballs. It's not just wall-to-wall shoggoffs and fish people impregnating New Englanders. No, what defines Lovecraftian horror is the creeping terror that comes from the horrible understanding that reality is not what you thought it was. Sure, giant squid-headed monsters exist in that universe, but only as a plot device, as the incomprehensible thing that causes the sudden existential terror. The greatest irony in the article is that the author goes on to say horror games should all be like Soma, despite the fact that the studio behind the game are devout Lovecraft fans and tried to build at least some Lovecraftian elements into Soma itself. Hell, even the engine the game runs on is called the HPL engine. And can you guess what HPL might stand for?
Are often low on supplies.
What? I mean, we could probably put together a compelling argument that the idea of moving your consciousness between bodies, as seen in Soma, can be traced back to Lovecraft's story, The Shadow Out of Time. But hey, what do we know? Come to that, what do the creators of the fucking game she's filleting know either? Given that they themselves were influenced by the man she hates. Not a fucking shred of self-awareness, I swear. And here's the thing, we've got a theory about why people like her hate Lovecraft. She gives the overwhelming impression, as we already said, of being an NPC, a non-sentient creature programmed to only speak in neo-progressive buzzwords, who's incapable of self-awareness and independent thought. And the thing about that demographic is that every single one of them has some bizarre messiah complex going on, whereby they're the saviours of humanity and they're all stunning and brave and beautiful and unique.
Yes, we're all individuals!
And the sun shines out of their asses. Lovecraft reminds them that that's not true. He reminds them that they are literally nothing, the same as everyone else. In a large enough universe, the relative importance of everyone drops to zero, and this is a fucking massive universe. Everything they do or say or think will be lost in a blink of the universe's eye. So everything they do, everything we all do in fact, is utterly meaningless. Or, well, maybe it's just good old-fashioned jealousy. It must hurt to know that someone she hates had an entire literary genre named after him and is remembered with reverence 8 decades after his untimely death. It must be utterly soul-destroying to know that her legacy will never be a fraction of Lovecraft's. Perhaps it's only natural that she'd lash out in a state of sheer despair over her own irrelevancy. And so, like all good Marxists, she wants the genre destroyed, because when you get a fanbase you cannot dominate, and an art form you cannot infiltrate and take over, then clearly destruction is the way forward. After all, you can't have people freely liking whatever they want, when they should be liking whatever helps your political viewpoint. So it is, in fact, the only way. So, what have we learned? We've learned that the universe is utterly meaningless, that the sum total of our achievements will mean nothing on a universal scale, and that the only thing waiting for any of us is a lonely death. Well, if we're lucky, that is. If we're not, and if we witness the alternative, then we're going to see something so utterly alien to our existence that it will tear apart the thin veil of ignorance that stood as the only thing protecting our sanity. That's the core of Lovecraftian horror, and the thing is, as humanity has kept on peering into the darkness, we've realised that it's also the nature of reality. We've begun to realise how fragile our very existence is. We might not have sunken cyclopean cities housing dead gods that still dream, but we do have gamma ray bursts that could wipe us out in a second, and we'd never see it coming. We don't have whispering aliens stealing our brains away to realms unknown, but we do have wandering black holes. The demon Sultan Azathoth might not sit at the centre of our galaxy, but the supermassive black hole Sagittarius A does. And of course, one day in the far future, the accelerating expansion of the universe will mean that one day the stars will go out, and if somehow, by some miracle, we manage to survive that long, then our ultimate fate will be a doomed existence and a meaningless death on a tiny speck of a rock, all alone in the night. That is why Lovecraft's work will always be relevant, no matter the age of humanity. The world was a more religious place in his day, so the concept of a universe without meaning was terrifying to people who needed God's plan to get through their day. Well, today, as we've learned more and more about this cosmos, we've learned that the universe really is like that. It could end us in the blink of a squid god's eye, and no one and nothing would notice or care. That does also explain why NPCs are so terminally offended by the mere existence of Lovecraft's work. Cosmic horror always offends and terrifies the religious after all, and you don't need a god to have a religion. They've been programmed to believe they're on the right side of history, and that they're stunning, brave warriors who will change the world. But they won't. We've said before that video games offer perhaps the most unique way to tell a story, one that puts you in the driving seat, so they offer a unique way to experience the horror of a Lovecraftian setting. Thus, there is literally no way Lovecraftian horror won't be embraced by games. To suggest it won't is naive, and to suggest it shouldn't is arrogant dickery of the highest order. Plus, of course, us gamers like a challenge, and fighting against inevitable doom is one hell of a challenge. We don't just rage against the dying of the light, we find the thing making the light die, and shove pointy things up its ring piece. You see, even in Lovecraft's work, humans could sometimes win, even if only temporarily. Take the Call of Cthulhu for example, where Mega Squidward was taken out by a ship being rammed through his face. Then there's the Dunwich Horror, where the foul abomination was banished by using a particular magical ritual. Sure, the horrors will rise once more, but that's fine, because it means we get to twat Cthulhu again, with a bigger ship this time. Let's not forget that there are people who play Dark Souls for fun. Yup, normal people see unspeakable horror, what we see is a boss fight. So basically, Lovecraft is here to stay. His work has only grown more popular over the course of 80 years, and video games are only going to keep on making it even more popular. Which is really quite funny when you think about it, since the man who popularised the idea that all of our achievements mean nothing went on to become one of the most influential people in literature, with an entire genre named after him, and will almost certainly be remembered for fucking ever. He may have died almost penniless at the age of 46, but fuck me, that is one hell of a legacy. If there was a heaven, then I bet he'd be pissing himself laughing at the sheer irony of it. And on that maddening moment of hilarious revelation, it's time to end. Thanks very much for watching, I am AutomaTitan, and remember, if you need a minion to do your bidding, then you're probably better getting a subtitle guy than a shoggoth. Because while they're both amorphous blobs that eat everything within reaching distance, you won't have to keep spare eyeballs in the fridge.